So here's that that chart that you can see on the Google Classroom. And again, here is the photo that I used for the example. But that chances are that little seal is all that same coppery or yellowy brown. But because of the way the light's hitting, it's going to be broken down into different shapes, value shapes. Now, if you have an animal that's got a lot of black on it, on one side, that might be too much of a lost edge, right? So you might want to go in and show a contrast between the background and the subject. You know, so the positive and negative space, you might have to go in and lighten your negative space up to your guideline to show off that dark edge. And notice how the scratching or the stippling is closer together and then it starts to fade out. That's harder to do than it seems, but you don't want to necessarily have a stripe of light. You want to have it fade out. So those of you that do watercolor, it's kind of like when we dampen the brush and soften away from it. So that moving away from dark to light is kind of a cool thing to try. And notice how the background is stippling, and they use different techniques for the body. The lines are really far apart because this is a darker part of the bird. And on this one, there's a little bit of environment. So because the tip of the beak was really black, they were pretty smart in making that white branch happen to come right behind that dark part of the beak, or that wouldn't have shown. They would have had to have a white outline around it. And look at the way they did the feather sections. And you can have lost edge on this too. You can have it fade away as long as there's enough information for the viewer to tell what's going on. I kind of like that mysterious fading away of the lost edge.
I'm gonna get these papers.
This is a poster that I have from somewhere, and it was a scratchboard, and then they put color in it. It looks like it's something in a bookstore that's advertising this book. But you can see how they use scratch technique. And this is done in a very quick painterly kind of way. You can see that the strokes are done loosely, not real tight. There's cross hatching there. On the building, there's more of a, the lines are more ruler straight, and on the body, the lines are following the curves of the body. And since the hat is kind of dark, they scratched out the sky around it to make the dark hat show up. And on the lady's hair, she has dark hair, so all they did is scratch a little bit of a highlight on her hair, and then her face going up to the edge of it and leaving a lot of black on the hair. This is real shiny. It's been laminated. Okay, there's my rooster. I showed you that, and you can see that this would actually be a really fun one to do. Even though it's a black bird, it's got lots of values in it. So if you want to practice, you can either do it on a strip. You know, just divide your strip in half and try and go from dark to light on your practice strip with different techniques. And I would suggest dividing your practice strip in half. Let me do one here. I'll do it kind of large. Let me get some big chalk so you can see it. Okay, I got a big white chalk because this is a big piece of paper here. So pretend this is your practice strip. And you know, just kind of divide it in half, and maybe divide each half in fourths. So you have 4 different little sections to practice. So you can say this is going to be the darkest right here to the lightest. So and I'm going to start with cross hatching. So on the lightest, you know, actually it might be better to start over here with the darkest. Okay, I'm going to go light to dark. No, I'm going to do dark to light, sorry. So the darkest one is going to have lines that are really far apart. So it reads as a darker value. And then on the next one over, I want this to be a little darker. So this is pretending that I'm scratching off on the scratchboard. Like this is a scratch tool and this is a scratchboard. And on the next one, I can either use a broader tool and get broader strokes, because the 2 types of tools that I have, one is more of a rounded one. Can you kind of see how that's kind of rounded? And this one is more pointed. So there are 2 types of tools here. Oops. There we go. And they'll give a different thickness to the scratch that you do. So you could do that, or you could do go to just that same tool and go closer together, have your lines closer together, so it starts to appear lighter. Or you can go in more than one direction. So the more of that black I'm scratching off, the lighter it gets. So if you squint your eyes, you see how this is darkest, then a little lighter, and then a little lighter, and then finally you can have them really close together, or really broad strokes close together, going in multiple different directions. So it starts to look almost light. So there's darkest, lighter, lighter, lighter. So you can experiment with those techniques, and then try doing one with stippling. So if the dots are really far apart, let's just do it like this. It's going to be dark, and then if the dots are closer together, it gets lighter, and then closer together it gets really light, and then finally so close that the dots are right on top of each other. But even though they're on top of each other and you're doing them as dots, it'll look different than if you're coloring it in. So, you know, your texture of how you scratch off is actually showing up, even though these 2 values are kind of the same. The way they were done is a little different. You can try doing some techniques where you try just curlicues. There's darker, lighter, you know. So in other words, the more white you're scratching away, the lighter and lighter and lighter it gets with each technique. So see if you can control that. This is that herringbone technique, which is kind of neat, where you do some parallel strokes and then you change angles. And this isn't so much for an animal, because most animals would not have that kind of fur or texture, but it could be in a background area just to fill in. It's kind of entertaining. It's kind of a fun. So that's a herringbone, and you can have them farther apart or closer together. Okay. Okay, so I would suggest, and these are on your Google Classroom, these practices to try.
And then,
So here's one that a kid did. Here's their preliminary drawing where they divided up the animal into not only the contour, but the value shapes, and then decided to put in, and this is maybe a middle school kid, but they put in a little bit of the environment, which is kind of nice, and then ready to transfer it onto the Scratchboard. Brian, you asked about doing a full body. You could do that. Just make sure you are able to see the texture of the animal. The farther away you get, the harder it is to see that. Now on this one, this kid did not only the preliminary drawing, but they filled it in so they could kind of see how that was going to look. But what are they going to scratch off? They're going to scratch off this part if this is going to stay black. And then, so this was never finished. So you take the red ballpoint pen and you go over it, push pretty hard, check and make sure. Now, can you guys see that if I angle it? Let's see if I can. Can you see a little bit of that drawing in there?
Yes.
It's not real obvious. It's not going to be white, but you'll be able to see it so that you'll know. Let me do a stripe here. So I can see where those stripes are, and I'm going to take, since it's pretty, and then you have your photograph right here, so you know what's what. So I know that this one right here is going to be all white. So I'm going to take my bold scratch tool, and I'm holding it like a pencil, and I'm slowly pulling that toward me. And you actually start to see this little powdery stuff happen, which is little bits of black ink that are scratching off. It's you put on some quiet music and just enjoy that peacefulness of it's kind of like a coloring book. You've got your drawing all done. And now I've scraped away. I don't know if you can see, there's some little bits of black there. So that's how you do it. But don't start in by outlining it. Just start in by starting to color in the shape. Here's one that I started. Let me find the photo. Come on, here's my real. Well,
Susie, Scratchboard is about 8 by 10. Do you want us to do real small like that?
yeah, the ones I'm selling are this size. These are 5 by 7. But if you want to go bigger, you can. I mean, this guy here, look at how big his was compared to what I'm selling here.
Okay.
So, but that took many hours of work. The larger it is, but he wanted to do a full body. Actually, this was a pen and ink assignment where they took their organic shaped animal, put something geometric behind it. And he chose to do his, all the other kids were doing pen and ink, but he wanted to do his on Scratchboard. So same idea, only instead of little black marks, you're doing white marks. Okay, so here's my reference. I've drawn in all the shapes of the values and the shape of the contours. You can see the, I don't know if you can see it, but there's a little bit of a wing feather there. I've transferred it on. And now I'm taking my tools, and do you see why I'm leaving a lot of space between my strokes on this part? Because that is done in rim lighting, And I want this area to be fairly dark. And I didn't put any strokes on the eye because it's a little black eye. So I'm going in with my more sharper tool, not my rounded one. And I'm pulling it toward me. I'm laying it down and scratching it toward me and scratching it toward me at kind of an angle. And the tips of these little wings are lighter. And I'm scratching in the direction that the feathers are growing. This is a slightly lighter than this. So I'm leaving a little less space between the scratching. Then up here, it's almost pure white. So I'm taking my broad and I'm actually scraping off almost all of the black there. The same thing with here. That's going to be scraped off almost all. Now, as I get out here, I want that to look fuzzy. So I might switch to my my skinnier tip. There's also using an X-Acto knife works great. Should be a nice sharp new one. They do even these kind of start to get dull after a while and have to be replaced. I noticed there's a little dark edge around the outside of the wing. So I'm leaving that little dark black showing that. There's a cool tool you can order on out of one of the art supply catalogs, and it's like a brush tool, and these are little pieces of wire sticking out. It's kind of cool, and as you go in, it makes multiple lines. Let's see, I got another one too. There's another one. So it's a Scratchboard wire brush. Whoops, wire brush. So let's open it up and try it out. This one is really wild. So it's got, I should probably test it on something else. Ah.
Yeah, well, like tiny rake.
Right, it's like a tiny rake, exactly, and it's got lots of little wiggly wires. This is kind of the same thing, only the wires are close together. And I can't remember where I ended up getting it, but if you Google Scratchboard wire brush, something will come up and it shows you. But that's kind of fun too. You don't need it because you can do the same thing by doing lots of little strokes like this. But can you see how fun this is? Yes, Mrs. Clark. Here's another one.
Who was that, Mary Ann?
No, that was me.
Oh,
I was imitating.
oh,
So here's my reference, a white animal. But even within that white, can you see those darker grays, those values? So you don't want to just scratch it off totally white. So I'm starting to scratch it off. And what's interesting on this is I also did a pen and ink of it where I'm doing the opposite, where I'm using those same cross-hatching techniques to fill black in. So it's kind of interesting to compare the two. If you have tons of time in your life, it would be interesting to try doing the same reference as an ink drawing. And here's a finished one that has an environment in it.
wow.
If you have a very colorful reference, you have to think of this as a black and white photograph and squint your eyes, transfer this value into a number, say, okay, if 10 is black and 1 is white, this will be a 1, but what is this? Is this like a 7? Is this like a 4? You know, what are those different colors translate into in terms of values? Value meaning how dark or how light it is. Okay.
Susie,
Yeah, go ahead.
I was experimenting on just a piece that I had, and I noticed that if I scratch out a lot to make a large wide area, the paper showing through is very high gloss. I don't know if this is just this cheap stuff I got on Amazon, or if that's what your scratch paper is like. The white showing through is very high gloss. If I wanted to add some color to that, how would you, what could you put on that high gloss paper?
Yeah, this is a cheapo one. And I can kind of see, mine's not high gloss. It's more of a powdery.
Oh, this is definitely high gloss. So,
What brand is it?
oh, whoops, can't see that.
Scratchboard. Okay, well, experiment.
Yeah.
Before you start your drawing, I would cut off a strip, you know, and make a practice strip of the same material.
Mhm.
And then do your preliminary drawing the same size as what's left. I don't know if they gave you multiple ones or, you know, this is like a
Oh,
5 by 7. I would work like a 5 by 7 and cut your piece down into several. And then experiment. So let's take one. Here's one that I did. And this is really cheapo Scratchboard. This is one that a kid did. Let's use one of theirs. And I'll take a little watercolor right now and try it out. I don't necessarily suggest that you do watercolor on it. I think that takes away from the drama of it myself. But
I was just thinking like a little pop of color, like.
oh, I see what you're saying. I think it'll work.
Booty.
You could probably even do just a marker, a felt tip pen or something, but let's try it right here. Can you see that?
Oh,
It gave it a little bit of color there, and it might, you know, resist it a little bit. You might try where you're going to put the color. You might try scratching deeper down into the actual paper instead of the surface that is white. Be careful, because you know, you could end up scratching through it if you're too heavy-handed. Yeah, so I'm gonna, yeah, good question. I'm gonna stop the recording.